Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the viewport of the research shuttle, watching the alien landscape of Kepler 442b unfold below. The planet's twin suns cast strange purple shadows across vast crystalline formations that jutted from the surface like frozen lightning. After 3 years of deep space travel, she was finally here on humanity's first official xenobiology expedition. Beautiful, isn't it? Captain Rodriguez said, joining her at the window. Hard to believe anything could survive down there with those radiation storms. Sarah nodded, checking her medical scanner one more time. As the expedition's chief xenobiologist and trauma surgeon, she carried equipment that could analyze and treat virtually any Earth-based life form. Whether it would work on alien biology remained to be seen. The shuttle touched down near a series of massive cave systems that orbital scans had identified as potentially habitable. The moment Sarah stepped onto the alien soil, her scanner began chirping frantically. The readings were unlike anything in her databases. Complex organic signatures scattered throughout the cave network, but they seemed wrong somehow. Distressed. You getting this? She called to Dr. Martinez, the team's other scientist. Massive life signs, but they're not moving, he replied, frowning at his instruments. It's like they're all in some kind of stasis. The expedition team set up base camp quickly. As the others established communication arrays and defensive perimeters, Sarah found herself drawn toward the cave entrance. The organic readings were strongest there, and something else was nagging at her medical instincts. The biosignatures showed signs of chronic distress patterns she'd seen before in long-term trauma patients. Against protocol, she activated her helmet's high-powered lights and ventured just inside the cave mouth. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and covered in strange geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own faint bioluminescence. But it was the sound that stopped her cold, a low, rhythmic rumbling that her trained ear immediately recognized as labored breathing. Something massive was in pain. Her scanner went wild as she moved deeper, following the sound. The readings showed a creature of enormous size, roughly the proportions of an ancient earth mammoth but easily 3 times larger. But the medical data streaming across her display made her heart race. Severe infection, systemic inflammation, chronic pain indicators that suggested suffering over an impossibly long period. Sarah's hands moved automatically to her medical kit. Every instinct she'd developed over 15 years of emergency medicine screamed that something needed immediate intervention. But this wasn't human. This wasn't even Earth-based life. For all she knew, her presence alone could be fatal to the creature. The breathing grew more labored as she approached, and she could see faint light ahead. Her scanner indicated they were close, maybe 50 meters. But Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through her comm, ordering her to return to base camp immediately. She stood frozen in the tunnel, torn between military discipline and medical ethics. Somewhere ahead, a creature had been suffering for who knew how long, but was helping it worth risking the entire expedition? The decision was made for her when a new sound echoed through the caves. A low, mournful call that seemed to carry centuries of pain. It was a sound that transcended species barriers, speaking directly to the healer within her. Sarah Chen had taken an oath to do no harm and to help those in need. Standing in an alien cave system light years from Earth, she realized that oath knew no boundaries of species or planet. She moved forward into the unknown. The chamber opened before Sarah like a cathedral of living stone. Bioluminescent veins pulsed through the walls, casting dancing patterns of blue and green light across surfaces that seemed to breathe with organic rhythm. But all of that faded to background noise when she saw the creature. It was magnificent and heartbreaking in equal measure. The being resembled an enormous mammoth, but its hide was a deep silver blue that shimmered with an inner light. 6 legs supported a body that must have weighed several tons, and a trunk nearly as thick as Sarah herself hung limply to one side. Most striking were the creature's eyes, large, intelligent, and filled with an unmistakable mixture of pain and ancient sadness. Those eyes fixed on Sarah the moment she entered the chamber, and she felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. This was no mere animal. There was intelligence here, awareness, and something that looked remarkably like hope. Her medical scanner painted a grim picture across her helmet display. The creature's left rear foot was massively swollen, the tissue around what appeared to be a hoof showing classic signs of severe abscess formation, but the readings suggested this wasn't a recent injury. The inflammation patterns indicated chronic infection that had persisted for decades, possibly centuries. How was it even alive? Sarah approached slowly, hands visible and empty, making soft clicking sounds that seemed to resonate in the chamber's acoustics. The creature watched her with those enormous eyes but didn't move away. When she was close enough to touch the injured limb, she stopped and waited. The creature made a sound, not the mournful call she'd heard earlier, but something softer, almost questioning. Then incredibly it shifted its weight and lifted the infected foot slightly, presenting it to her. It understood. It knew she was here to help. Sarah's hands trembled as she activated her medical scanner's detailed mode, running the beam along the swollen tissue. The infection was massive, a pocket of corruption that had probably started as a simple puncture wound and festered for longer than human civilization had existed. The creature's natural healing seemed to have contained it, but never eliminated it, leaving it in a state of chronic agony. "My God," she whispered. Forgetting her comm was still active. "Chen, report your status immediately." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled in her ear. "I found something, Captain. A creature that needs medical attention." "Negative. Return to base camp now." "That's an order." Sarah looked up at the creature's face, seeing something like understanding in those alien features. It knew what the voices in her helmet meant. It had probably listened to its own kind debate whether to help it, whether the risk was worth it, whether it was already too late. With respect, "Captain, I'm a doctor first," Sarah said, reaching for her medical kit. "And this patient has been waiting long enough." She cut the comm channel. The creature made another soft sound, and Sarah could have sworn she heard gratitude in it. She began laying out her instruments, her mind racing through treatment options. The abscess needed to be drained, cleaned, and treated with the strongest antibiotics in her kit. But would Earth-based medications even work on alien physiology? Only one way to find out. As she prepared her instruments, the creature lowered its massive head until it was only a few feet from her. This close, she could see intelligence in those eyes that rivaled any human she'd ever met. It was studying her tools, her movements, her intent. When she looked up and met its gaze directly, the creature made a sound that rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. But this time Sarah was certain she heard something new in it. Trust. Sarah had performed emergency surgery in battlefield hospitals, trauma centers during natural disasters, and even once in the cargo hold of a transport ship during a meteor storm. But she had never operated on a patient whose heartbeat she could feel through the ground beneath her feet. The creature remained perfectly still as she examined the infected foot more closely. The abscess was enormous, a pocket of infection larger than her entire torso, hidden beneath skin that had thickened over centuries of chronic inflammation. The smell that emanated from it was unlike anything in her medical experience, sweet and metallic with undertones that made her stomach turn. "I'm going to help you," she said softly, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words but hoping it might grasp her intent. "This is going to hurt at first, but then you'll feel better than you have in a very long time." The creature's trunk moved slowly toward her, stopping just short of touching her helmet. She could feel warm air flowing from what she assumed were breathing passages, and the gesture felt remarkably like a benediction. Sarah activated her field surgical kit, selecting the largest drainage catheter she carried. For a human patient, it would be massive overkill. For this creature, it looked almost comically small. She'd have to work with what she had. The anesthetic was her first challenge. She had no idea if Earth-based nerve blocks would work on alien physiology, but she had to try. The creature didn't even flinch when she inserted the injection needles around the infected area. Either it had nerves of steel, or pain had been its constant companion for so long that a few needle pricks barely registered. 20 minutes later, when she tested the area with a probe, the creature showed no reaction. The anesthetic was working. "Here we go," Sarah murmured, making her first incision. The infected material that poured out defied her every expectation. Instead of the yellow-green pus she anticipated, what emerged was a silvery fluid that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Her scanner went wild, detecting complex organic compounds unlike anything in Earth databases. But the most important reading remained constant. The creature's vital signs were stabilizing for the first time since she'd begun monitoring them. The drainage seemed to go on forever. Sarah found herself constantly repositioning her collection containers as liter after liter of infected material flowed from the wound. The creature remained motionless throughout, but she could see changes in its posture, subtle shifts that spoke of relief so profound it was almost spiritual. As the last of the infected material drained away, Sarah got her first clear look at the wound that had caused this centuries-long suffering. Deep within the tissue, she found something that made her heart race. A crystalline fragment clearly artificial, embedded so deeply it had become part of the creature's anatomy. It was technology. Alien technology, but definitely artificial. The fragment pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns she'd seen in the cave walls, and her scanner detected active energy signatures coming from it. This wasn't just an infected wound. This was some kind of implant gone wrong. Working carefully with her finest instruments, Sarah began the delicate process of extracting the fragment. The creature's breathing deepened as she worked, and she could feel tension she hadn't even realized was there beginning to leave its massive frame. When the fragment finally came free, the creature made a sound unlike any she'd heard before. A deep, resonant note that seemed to fill the entire chamber with harmonic overtones. The bioluminescent patterns in the walls pulsed brighter in response, and Sarah realized she was witnessing something far beyond simple medical treatment. She was participating in something sacred. The wound, freed of the foreign object, began to heal before her eyes, not rapidly, but with a visible improvement that suggested the creature's natural healing abilities had been suppressed by whatever the fragment had been doing to its system. Sarah cleaned the wound thoroughly, applied her strongest broad-spectrum antibiotics, and sealed it with biocompatible surgical mesh. As she worked, she noticed other changes in her patient. The dullness she'd seen in its eyes was fading, replaced by an alertness that spoke of intelligence fully awakened for the first time in centuries. When she finished, the creature slowly, carefully, placed its newly healed foot on the ground. The weight that settled onto it was tentative at first, then with growing confidence. When it finally stood fully upright, Sarah had to crane her neck to see its face. The transformation was remarkable. This wasn't the same creature she'd found suffering in the darkness. This was something magnificent, powerful, and profoundly grateful, and it was looking at her with an expression that transcended species boundaries. Wonder. The silence that followed the creature's first pain-free steps in centuries was profound. Sarah stood transfixed as the massive being tested its mobility, shifting weight from foot to foot with obvious joy. But the moment was shattered when her comm system crackled back to life. "Dr. Chen, your position has been compromised. We're detecting massive energy signatures from your location. Evacuate immediately." Captain Rodriguez's voice carried an edge of panic she'd never heard before. Sarah glanced at her scanner and understood his concern. The bioluminescent patterns throughout the cave were pulsing with increasing intensity, and energy readings were spiking across the spectrum. But she didn't feel threatened. If anything, the atmosphere felt celebratory. The creature lowered its massive head toward her, and this time its trunk did make contact. A gentle touch against her helmet that somehow conveyed volumes. Through her suit's tactile feedback, she felt warmth and what she could only describe as affection. Then something extraordinary happened. The crystalline fragment she'd extracted began to glow brighter, and suddenly the cave filled with harmonic tones that seemed to resonate directly in her mind. Not sounds exactly, but something deeper. Communication. Images flooded her consciousness, not her own memories, but someone else's. She saw this world as it had been millennia ago, covered in vast cities of living crystal that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns she'd observed. She saw the creature's people, a civilization of beings who had achieved harmony between technology and biology in ways humanity could barely imagine. And she saw the war. The invaders came from the void between stars, mechanical beings that sought to consume organic life and convert it to their own sterile purposes. The creature's people fought back, but they were scientists and healers, not warriors. One by one, their cities fell. The creature, she learned its name was something like a musical chord that her human mind translated as resonance, had been one of their greatest healers. As their civilization crumbled, the survivors made a desperate choice. They would enter stasis, hiding in the deep caves, waiting for a time when the galaxy might be safe again. But the stasis technology had been sabotaged. The crystalline implants that should have preserved them in perfect sleep had been corrupted by enemy infiltrators. Instead of peaceful rest, they brought slow agony. consciousness trapped in unresponsive bodies, aware but unable to move, heal, or even cry out for help. For over 800 years, Resonance had endured this torture, watching through shared consciousness as his people died one by one, their life forces slowly consumed by the malfunctioning implants. He had been the last, sustained only by a desperate hope that someone somewhere might eventually find them and understand their need. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the images faded. The scope of the suffering she'd just ended was beyond human comprehension. 8 centuries of conscious agony, endured by an entire civilization. But the story wasn't finished. New images flooded her mind. Resonance's people at the height of their power, their mastery of biological healing, their ability to regenerate entire ecosystems from barren worlds. Knowledge that could revolutionize human medicine, agriculture, even space exploration itself. Knowledge that Resonance was offering to share. The communication link strengthened, and Sarah found she could send her own thoughts back. She showed him Earth, humanity's struggles with disease and hunger, their fumbling attempts to heal their own world's environmental damage. She shared her own memories of medical school, her drive to heal and help, the oath she'd taken to do no harm. Resonance's response was immediate and overwhelming. Approval, kinship, and something that felt remarkably like joy. In her dedication to healing, he recognized a kindred spirit. In humanity's imperfect but earnest attempts to better themselves, he saw hope for the galaxy. The energy readings in the cave spiked again, and Sarah realized that their communication was being broadcast somehow. Every member of her expedition was receiving echoes of what she was experiencing. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through her comm, no longer panicked but filled with awe. "Chen, are we all seeing this?" "Yes, Captain," Sarah replied, her voice shaky with emotion. "And this is just the beginning." Resonance was already moving toward the deeper chambers, his newly healed body carrying him with surprising grace. He was leading her somewhere, eager to show her something that would change everything. As they moved through passages lined with dormant technology, Sarah's scanner detected dozens of other stasis chambers, all empty now, their occupants long dead, but the technology itself remained, waiting for someone with the wisdom to use it properly. They emerged into a vast chamber filled with what could only be described as a living library. Crystalline structures grew from floor to ceiling, each one pulsing with stored information, medical knowledge, biological engineering, the secrets of life itself preserved in formats that her scanner could barely begin to analyze. Resonance's trunk gestured toward the crystals, and his meaning was unmistakable. This was his gift to humanity, the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had spent millennia learning to nurture and heal life in all its forms. But as Sarah stepped forward to examine the nearest crystal, alarms began blaring in her helmet. Her scanner had detected something else in the chamber, energy signatures that matched the corrupted implant she'd removed from Resonance. They weren't alone in this place. Something was watching them from the shadows, and it had been waiting for exactly this moment. The mechanical horror that emerged from the chamber's shadows was like nothing in Sarah's worst nightmares. It moved on multiple articulated legs that ended in razor-sharp points, its body a twisted fusion of corrupted organic matter and cold metal. Where Resonance's technology lived in harmony with biology, this thing represented their antithesis, life perverted and enslaved to mechanical purpose. Sarah's scanner went haywire as the creature skittered closer, its sensors painting readings that hurt to look at. This was one of the infiltrators from Resonance's memories, a saboteur that had spent 8 centuries ensuring that the sleeping civilization would never wake. Resonance trumpeted a warning that shook dust from the chamber ceiling, placing his massive bulk between Sarah and the mechanical horror. But she could see immediately that despite his size, he was no match for this thing. His people had been healers and builders, not warriors. And 8 centuries of suffering had left him weak, his natural defenses compromised. The infiltrator's attack was swift and brutal. Needle-sharp appendages lashed out toward Resonance's newly healed foot, seeking to reinfect the wound Sarah had just closed. But the creature hadn't accounted for human reflexes honed by years of battlefield medicine. Sarah's plasma scalpel was in her hand before conscious thought could interfere. The surgical tool, designed to cauterize wounds with precision, carved through 2 of the attacker's limbs with surgical efficiency. The mechanical horror recoiled, emitting a sound like grinding gears mixed with organic screams. "That's for 8 centuries of torture," Sarah snarled, her peaceful healer's demeanor replaced by something far more dangerous. The infiltrator regrouped quickly, adapting its attack pattern to account for this new threat. But it had made a fundamental error in calculation. It had expected to face a single weakened alien and instead found itself confronting the product of millions of years of human evolution. Sarah Chen wasn't just a healer. She was a predator who had chosen to heal instead of hunt, and when her patients were threatened, that ancient savagery came flooding back. Resonance's voice filled her mind with urgent warnings, showing her images of the infiltrator's capabilities. It could regenerate, adapt, learn from each attack. Traditional weapons would only slow it down, but as the alien's knowledge flowed through their mental link, Sarah began to understand something the mechanical horror hadn't anticipated. She wasn't fighting it alone. The crystalline library around them wasn't just storage, it was a network, and Resonance was its living interface. As Sarah danced around the infiltrator's attacks, using her smaller size and human agility to stay ahead of its strikes, Resonance began activating dormant systems throughout the chamber. Bioluminescent patterns raced along the walls as ancient defenses came online. What had once been a place of learning transformed into something altogether more militant. The crystals themselves began to resonate, their harmonics creating interference patterns that disrupted the infiltrator's coordination. But the mechanical horror was adapting, its corrupted AI learning to compensate for each new attack. Sarah realized they were fighting a holding action at best. They needed something more decisive. The answer came when her scanner detected a familiar energy signature buried deep within the infiltrator's core. Another crystalline fragment like the one she'd removed from Resonance, but this one was different. Where Resonance's implant had been corrupted to cause suffering, this one had been designed to coordinate and control. It was the infiltrator's brain, and it was within reach of her surgical skills. "Resonance, I need you to hold it still for exactly 30 seconds, Sarah said, her mind racing through the procedural steps. "Can you do that?" The massive alien's response was immediate and resolute. His trunk lashed out, wrapping around the infiltrator's central mass with crushing force. The mechanical horror's limbs flailed wildly, seeking purchase to break free. But Resonance held firm despite the damage it was inflicting on his recently healed body. Sarah moved with the precision that had made her one of Earth's finest surgeons. Her plasma scalpel carved through armor plating designed to withstand military-grade weapons. Guided by instincts honed through thousands of hours in operating theaters, she could see the control crystal now, pulsing with malevolent energy at the center of the creature's twisted anatomy. The extraction required a delicacy that seemed impossible under combat conditions, but Sarah had performed miracle surgeries before. As Resonance's strength began to fail and his grip loosened, she made the final cuts that freed the control crystal from its housing. The effect was immediate and devastating. The infiltrator collapsed as if its strings had been cut, its mechanical limbs twitching spasmodically before falling still. The corrupted AI that had maintained its existence for 8 centuries winked out of existence, leaving behind only inert metal and dying organic components. Sarah held the control crystal up to the chamber's bioluminescent light, studying its dark energy patterns. Unlike Resonance's implant, this one pulsed with active malevolence, still trying to execute its programming even separated from its host body. "What do we do with it?" she asked, looking up at Resonance. The alien's response came not in words but in action. His trunk reached toward one of the library crystals, and Sarah understood. The knowledge stored here included the original programming codes, the master keys that could turn the infiltrator's own technology against its creators. As she approached the crystal, her comm system burst into activity. Captain Rodriguez's voice carried a mixture of awe and terror. "Chen, we're detecting massive energy signatures planet-wide. Every cave system on the continent is lighting up like Christmas." "What the hell did you do down there?" Sarah looked at the control crystal in her hands, understanding dawning. This wasn't just one infiltrator's brain. It was a network node. By removing it, she disrupted whatever signal had been keeping the entire sabotage network active across the planet. Resonance's people were waking up. The liberation of an entire world had begun with a simple medical procedure, and Sarah Chen was standing at the center of the greatest moment in galactic history. The planet trembled as ancient stasis systems powered down across entire continents, Through the crystalline network, Sarah felt the awakening of minds that had been trapped in nightmare for 8 centuries. The sensation was overwhelming. Thousands of consciousness emerging from torment into a freedom they had almost forgotten how to comprehend. Resonance's massive form shuddered, with emotion as his people's voices filled the network. Sarah, still linked to his mind, experienced echoes of their confusion, their pain, and their desperate need for healing. Many were dying as their corrupted implants finally gave out, their life forces too damaged by centuries of artificial suffering to sustain consciousness much longer. "We have to help them," Sarah said, checking her medical supplies. "How many are there?" Resonance's response came through images, vast underground complexes across multiple continents, each one filled with stasis chambers. Tens of thousands of his people were awakening, but their medical needs were far beyond what one human doctor could address. That's when Sarah remembered why she'd become a doctor in the first place. Not to be a lone hero, but to heal, to teach, and to build systems that could help far more people than any individual ever could. "Captain Rodriguez," she called through her comm. "I need immediate contact with Earth Command. Medical emergency, planetary scale." "Chen, what are you talking about? Emergency services are 43 light years away." "Not emergency services, Captain. Emergency teaching." Sarah's plan was audacious in its simplicity. The crystalline network that preserved Resonance's people's knowledge could work both ways. If she could upload human medical knowledge into their system, their own healers could use their advanced technology to treat conditions that were beyond Earth's current capabilities. But first, she needed to save the ones who were dying right now. Working with Resonance as her guide, Sarah began the largest medical triage operation in galactic history. Through the network, she could assess patients across multiple cave systems simultaneously, identifying those in critical condition and prioritizing treatment protocols. Her scanner became an extension of the alien medical network, its readings translated into formats that Resonance's people could understand. The crystalline control fragment she'd taken from the infiltrator, properly reprogrammed, became a universal medical interface that allowed her Earth-based knowledge to integrate with their biological healing systems. The first patient transport arrived within an hour. A group of Resonance's people who had managed to travel from nearby cave systems despite their weakened condition. Sarah had never seen beings in such critical states still conscious and mobile. Their will to survive, their determination to help their dying people, was beyond anything in her medical experience. What followed was a medical marathon that would have been impossible without alien technology. Sarah worked for 18 hours straight, her human endurance enhanced by Resonance's people's understanding of biological optimization. They taught her techniques that allowed her body to process fatigue toxins more efficiently, to maintain mental clarity despite the crushing workload. In return, she taught them human medical approaches they had never considered. Her species' talent for aggressive intervention, for refusing to accept that a patient was beyond help, proved invaluable when combined with their advanced healing technology. The breakthrough came when Sarah was treating a patient whose stasis implant had fused so completely with their nervous system that traditional extraction would be fatal. Human surgical techniques weren't sophisticated enough, and alien methods weren't aggressive enough, but together, they could accomplish what neither could alone. Sarah guided the precision while Resonance's people provided the technology. Her human instincts for when to push harder and when to pull back, combined with their ability to regenerate tissue at the cellular level, achieved what had seemed impossible. They saved a life that both medical traditions would have written off as hopeless. Word of the successful fusion technique spread through the network at light speed. Across the planet, medical teams that combined human determination with alien sophistication began saving patients who had been dying for centuries. But it was more than just medical collaboration. As Sarah worked alongside Resonance's people, she began to understand that she was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history. Two completely different medical traditions, evolved independently across millions of years and light years of space, were creating something greater than the sum of their parts. The final patient of that first day was Resonance himself. Despite his recovery from the abscess, 8 centuries of suffering had left damage throughout his system that even alien healing couldn't address alone. Sarah's examination revealed cellular damage patterns that required both human surgical intervention and alien regenerative technology to repair. As she worked on the being who had become her closest friend and collaborator, Sarah realized that their partnership had evolved into something deeper than mere cooperation. They had become representatives of what their species could accomplish together. When Resonance's treatment was complete, and his health fully restored for the first time in 8 centuries, he did something that surprised even Sarah. Through their neural link, he shared with her the most precious gift his people could offer, the location of other sleeping civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Resonance's people weren't the only ones who had hidden from the mechanical invaders. There were others out there, trapped in their own versions of torment, waiting for someone with the skills and compassion to set them free. Sarah looked up at her alien friend, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering her. Not just medical knowledge, but a mission that could span lifetimes. The galaxy needed healers, and humanity had just proven they were ready for the job. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed medical station orbiting Kepler 442b, watching as the latest group of human medical students worked alongside Resonance's people in the training complexes below. What had begun as a simple rescue mission had evolved into the galaxy's first interspecies medical academy. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Resonance's people, free from their centuries of suffering, had thrown themselves into sharing their knowledge with an enthusiasm that bordered on religious fervor. They saw in humanity not just allies but kindred spirits who understood that healing was the highest calling any intelligent being could pursue. Human medical students arrived monthly now, transported by ships that used hybrid technology, combining Earth engineering with alien biotechnology. They learned surgical techniques that could regenerate entire organs, pharmaceutical approaches that worked at the genetic level, and most importantly, the philosophy that had made Resonance's people such gifted healers. The understanding that true medicine treated not just bodies, but entire ecosystems of life. In return, humans brought something equally valuable: their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Sarah had watched alien students struggle with human case studies that seemed hopeless by their standards, only to discover that what they called reckless intervention, humans called never giving up. The hybrid techniques they developed together were already revolutionizing medicine across known space. Diseases that had plagued civilizations for millennia were yielding to treatment protocols that combined human aggression with alien precision. Even the mechanical invaders that had terrorized the galaxy for so long were beginning to withdraw from systems where hybrid medical teams had learned to reverse their biological corruption. But for Sarah, the greatest victory wasn't measured in techniques learned or lives saved. It was the moment she had witnessed just last week, when a human surgeon and an alien healer had worked together to save the life of a mechanical being that had been captured and deprogrammed. The patient had been a victim of the same corruption that had created the infiltrators, its organic components enslaved to mechanical imperatives. Traditional approaches would have destroyed it entirely, but the hybrid team had found a way to separate the biological from the mechanical without killing either. When the organic being had awakened, free for the first time in millennia, it had wept with gratitude. Another species added to the growing alliance of life that was spreading across the galaxy. Sarah's comm chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Admiral Chen, no relation, despite the shared name, appeared on her screen with news that made her heart race. Dr. Chen, we've received confirmation from the Andromeda expedition. The signals Resonance identified have led us to 17 more sleeping civilizations. We're putting together the largest medical relief mission in human history, and we want you to lead it. The scope of what they were proposing was staggering. 17 civilizations, each potentially containing millions of beings who had been suffering for centuries or millennia. It would require every technique they had developed, every insight they had gained, and probably innovations they hadn't even imagined yet. Sarah looked down at the planet below, where Resonance was leading a group of students through their first major surgery. His people had named him something that translated roughly as the Bridge Builder, recognizing his role in connecting their civilization with humanity's. Through their still active neural link, she felt his awareness of her decision before she had fully made it herself. His response was immediate and warm: approval, encouragement, and a deep sense of shared purpose that transcended species boundaries. Admiral, I'll need full medical autonomy and the right to recruit from both human and alien populations, Sarah said, and I want Resonance as my chief medical partner. Done. When can you leave? Sarah smiled, remembering the scared young doctor who had stepped onto an alien world 6 months ago, torn between duty and compassion. That woman had worried about violating protocols. By helping a single suffering creature, the woman she had become understood that sometimes the greatest duty was to ignore the rules entirely. We leave as soon as the new class graduates, she said. The galaxy is full of patients who have been waiting long enough. As she ended the call, Sarah felt Resonance's presence in her mind, sharing images of the worlds they would visit, the beings they would heal, the civilizations they would help rebuild. It was a mission that would span decades, possibly centuries, requiring innovations they couldn't yet imagine. But they wouldn't be working alone. Every being they saved would add to their knowledge, their capabilities, their understanding of what life could become when different species worked together toward common goals. The mechanical invaders had sought to reduce the galaxy to uniform, lifeless efficiency. Instead, they had inadvertently created the greatest collaboration in cosmic history, an alliance of healers dedicated to nurturing the infinite diversity of life itself. Sarah Chen had started her career wanting to save lives. Now she was part of something that would save entire worlds. Standing at the viewing port, watching alien and human students work together in perfect harmony, she knew that Resonance's people had been right about one thing from the beginning. Healing wasn't just about repairing damage. It was about making life better than it had ever been before. And humanity, working alongside their new allies, was just getting started.